What is up, everybody? It's Tuesday night. Tuesday night means one thing. It's Orion podcast time. My
Yeah,
name is
boy.
Chad Brock.
And I'm Zach Bailiff.
You guys are watching or listening to Orion podcast. Welcome. Welcome back, everybody. How the heck are you? How you been? Good to see you in the comments. Yeah, good to see you in the comments. That's just kind of how it works on the
Yeah.
podcast live. We don't get to see everybody, but they're there, moral
Yeah.
supporting us.
Morally supporting.
Morally supporting us. Yeah, man. So yeah, it's been an interesting 36 hours. PSA for all you folks out there at home: if your dog eats a corn cob, get it to the vet right away. Yeah, that's a real thing. Cows eat corn cobs all the time. I didn't think it was no big a deal. It's a pretty big deal. So
Apparently
yeah,
so.
it's corn cob season. Make sure you get your dogs. Don't let them eat corn cobs. Don't give it to them. I didn't give mine to it. It was committed a robbery. But anyway, so I'm running on like 39 hours of being awake. So if I start rambling like I am right now, just defer, Zach. Just jump in there and save me.
Well, in the last couple of weeks since the last time we were on, I guess you have fished a handful of tournaments.
Yeah, that's to say the least. I think it's been like, well, you got 2 through the weeknight and then the weekends, and man, yeah, busy
Been
time of year.
nonstop.
It's since the end of May and April, May, and now June, it's been busy. It's been busy. We fished our first river tournament last week, the short fish bash, as it should be called.
Right.
Yeah, those little under 12s. Those are. It's hard to imagine that you're going out there and you're fishing for a fish that's under 12 inches because of the slot limit. Get 2 overs
Right.
and as many unders as 5. Yeah, that's different. It's a different ball game. But they bite. They're dumb river fish, and they ain't never seen a lot of them. Ain't never seen nothing before, so it makes it even more fun.
Yeah. At least a lot of volume, a lot of catches anyway.
Sometimes it can be tough with the good old fashioned carp, Asian carp that have taken over the river. But that's life. We're learning, living, learning, having fun. We're out there fishing. It's the main thing. You've got some stuff going on. You just got back from another shoot.
Yeah, so we hustled back from Indiana. I was home for, I don't know, 8 or 9 hours and got the yard mowed and laundry done and repacked and headed down to Seven Springs for the Total Archery Challenge event here in Pennsylvania. Always a big crowd. I think this has grown to be either the largest or the second largest event in their series of shoots that they have all throughout the country. If you guys don't know, I mean, Pennsylvania is probably the most dense state in the country as far as bow hunters per square mile. So it brings a lot of folks out. It's Total Archery Challenge is kind of a giant novelty shoot in a way. I think they had 8 courses set this year, and there's usually one course that's relatively short, kind of maxes out around 50 to 58 yards. But a couple of the ones we shot, I mean, the RMEF course, which was the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation course, was all elk targets. There was 15 elk targets over about 3 to 3.25 miles. I think we had 6 targets over 100 yards, and our shortest one was 48. And then we shot the prime course on our second day, and we had a 120-yard moose target out there with. So that was a blast. I've worked at that shoot now for 5 or 6 years in a row, and that's the first time I've ever gotten to shoot it. And it sounds like, based on what the owner of the company that I handle social for and I had discussed, and then the other gentleman that was with us is a really good friend of ours, with the companies that they have and stuff, I think it's definitely kind of their target demo, and I think worth their while to put their money into that versus some other events that they've done in the past. So there's a good chance we hit 5 or 6 of them next year. So it could be a busy but really fun summer.
It's kind of fun to see some of these things changing in the outdoor space. Companies like AA, Jackson Kayak going back out there and pressing the flesh with the people at events and the different things like that, rather than just going to the big trade shows and doing some of the other stuff that happens. It's neat.
Yeah,
it's a neat thing.
Yeah, the trade show, especially in the archery world, is more of a dealer specific show, but they still hit a lot of the larger professional tournaments and stuff. And I mean, with the pros and a lot of the folks shooting tournaments, as you well know, there's a lot of sponsored folks or, guys running on discount staff and things like that. So it's not a real big retail, effort for them or return. And I think shows like, or events like this, I think, it gets them it's more grassroots, if you want to look at it that way, and kind of gets them in touch more with the consumer and the everyday guy that's buying their gear. So I think it's a really good, worthwhile event for them to be at, and they're a lot of fun. So, and
our guest tonight, man, he's no stranger to being out there. He is he's a man of the radio, man of the airwaves himself. He's got a little bit more experience than we do with our little podcast here. 50 episode. This is like our 50th episode that we're actually publishing. So,
we're that high?
We've crossed, we're going towards 100 now. So, yeah. A guy that's done way more than 100. One, the only, Mr. Joey Monteleone. What's up, man?
How are you?
How are you doing, sir?
Let me get you in the big box. You don't need to be in the little box. It ain't about us. It's about you tonight, sir.
Been doing radio for 38 years, and we're live every day, Monday through Friday, 5:25 a.m., and we're hitting 38 states. So drive time on the East Coast. I don't know that we're hitting the left coast, but we're on the World Wide Web. So a lot of fun. Get a lot of fan mail from some really strange places: Japan, Australia, Great Britain, Canada, all the states. Crazy. Great. It's fun. It's good stuff.
Yeah. That's wild. I can imagine. I mean, I couldn't imagine. Some of the questions from Japan, though, have to be very interesting, no, for fishing?
They idolize American bass anglers.
Oh, yes.
I mean, they just think we're it. And they're on the cutting edge for a lot of different things. And they come up with a lot of things that end up getting imported into the United States. And a sabiki rig is something a lot of people haven't heard of. It's a bunch of small jigs that you can use to catch. If you're in a place that's got shad, you can drop that down there. You might catch 12 shad on one rod. I mean, some of the other things that they've come up with, and they're really hardcore quality. They want to make sure that everything is just as precise as it can be. So it makes for an interesting trade-off.
Yeah, I can imagine. Some of the techniques that they give us over the years have been they've really changed the bass fishing industry in a lot of ways, especially here in the Midwest where the conditions are less than favorable. Illinois, Ohio, Indiana, where it can be pretty tough a lot of the time. So lots of those type of things come into play here, and it's neat to see.
Yeah, and when you talk about trade shows years ago, you guys weren't even born yet. Realistically, I've been doing this for over 40 years. So there used to be something called AFTMA, and it was a trade show, and it was the 85% of the tackle that was sold that year was sold at that show. And you had, if there was a big name there, and I was been sponsored by a few people for almost that same amount of years. And it was a really unique. It's turned into ICAST now, which is ICAST is a little bit more of a party than it was when I was doing it, because we were there to work and we were there to sell, and it's been interesting. And I kind of backed into TV and did TV for 35 years and have really enjoyed that. I mean, there's nothing quite like hooking a big fish on television, and it's having all those mediums, radio, TV, being able to write. I authored my 3rd book last year. Have written magazine articles for over 40 years, and so it's been fun. It's a unique style of communication that we have now, that things have changed just into this. I mean, there was no podcast when I was getting started doing this, so this is good stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
It's definitely changing. So let's talking about changing and all that fun stuff and looking back in the day. Why don't you? This is one of the questions we always ask to all of our Ryan guests, and I'd like to ask it to you tonight. Tell us about your journey and how you began in the outdoors. I mean, was it something that started at a young age, something that came along later? How did you get started?
Well, it was much later for me. My father had a business, and I have gotten to do a lot of public speaking, and I tell people that farmers and Italians have kids so they can work for them. So my dad had his own store. And so until I kind of broke free of that, I went out on my own a little, probably when I was about 20, I got my own full-time job, and I was intrigued by the fishing thing. I hadn't gotten to go a lot, but I knew when I first started that I'd like it. And then the more I liked it, the better I got at it, the more I liked it, and I start taking some chances. And I've always taken, again, because I'm not a gearhead, and I don't have anything against people using electronics. I think sometimes I just wrote a blog post. It hasn't gone up on the website yet, but it's called essentially it's about the anglers that use it's called instinctive kayak angler, that you just, if you look at a long flat, it's not like you think there's a big drop off on it. If you look at a tree down in the water, you can kind of tell it's in 6-8 feet of water. You can tell by the size of the branch that it's a big tree. If you see boulder rock, there's crawfish that live there. So there's a lot of natural clues, and I kind of follow that. And so my early path was, there's an old country song said, "Too much month at the end of the money," and that's who I was. And so I won a flat bottom boat in a raffle for $5. Went out and got a trolling motor from a swap shop, and I used to use the battery out of my van I'm almost ashamed to say this, to power my trolling motor. And when the battery would run out, I'd just go ahead and get a paddle and paddle my way in from a little lake, and then I'd wave somebody down and get a jump start, and off I'd go back down. That's when somebody really wants to fish, when they'll do that.
Absolutely.
And so doing the TV thing, we had the big Go Fast boat. We had the 21-foot boat with the 250 on the back of it, and I could do that, but getting back, and it's funny that we're together now, because this is 10 years that I've been in a kayak, and that kayak world for me was not that much of a jump, because I still liked the small boats, getting into places other people couldn't get into. And when other people are trying to catch, you were talking about like the little dinky fish. When other people were trying to catch 5 fish for a limit, I'm always looking for a 5-pound fish. So I do things pretty differently than everybody else does, and probably am a little bit more scientific. I'm not opposed to live scope. I'm not opposed to electronics. It's just that I feel like it's almost more fun to figure that stuff out on your own.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, you've seen the evolution and how far it's come all these years. I mean, it's pretty incredible that you can actually see these fish swimming now. I mean, that's just wild, and it's only going to, as technology gets better, it's only going to get clearer and better as we move along. So now you talk about writing and the different things like that. What drew you that direction, as to say, I want to be into the industry side, the hosting side, over, like Bill Dance and them, they went out originally and chased the tournament side and all that, but then they came back to the media side. So what drew you to the media side first?
Well, I guess, like a lot of people my age, and I'm 72 now and still paddling my kayak and feeling pretty good about it. But at any rate, I saw things and read things that I thought were not correct, based off of my experience. And so I wrote my first magazine article, sent it in, and as you might well expect, they bought it. They didn't reject it, most people. And so it kind of started me on that path that, what is it? Superman said, truth, justice, and the American way. That's kind of where I said, I want people to know I'm not saying mine is the only way to do it, but this is how I do it. And I played in the tournament thing for a little while and cashed a lot of checks and had a chance to go big time in the big boats, and said, my kids were 3 and 7 at the time. And I said, yeah, I don't want to do that. It's that life is not what people think it is. And I'm not saying, if you're single and you want to be the guy that runs home and, unloads the boat, grabs some clean clothes and pets the dog and goes back out the door, then you can do that. But it's not the life that people think it is. Most people, when people see you do TV, they think you're getting rich. No, you're not. When
it costs a lot of money to do TV.
It does. It does. And it's a different life than people just don't understand. And I've been lucky because I've kind of tailored this all to where at the Grand Ole Opry, matter of fact, my radio spot is with AM 650 WSM, and people say it's an AM station. I said, it's the Grand Ole Opry station. We hit 38 states with 50,000 watts. So at the Grand Ole Opry, they say you plug in, you pray, and you play. And that's pretty much what I did. I'd show up. I wasn't selling anything other than my knowledge and my presentation skills. And, I did that for 35 years, did boat shows all over the country, which I greatly enjoyed. And, one door opens the next door, where I went to Mexico to film a video for Bass Pro Shops. And I went to Canada one time to do a wilderness canoe trip so I could catch some big smallmouth, and fell in love with it. So I guided up there for 27 summers, so one thing just kind of leads to the next. And, if you have a passion for this stuff, it's still work, but it's something that you can truly enjoy. And I love it. I still love it. And we fished last year 120 days. People said, you get tired of that? And I said, when I get tired of it, sometime in July, usually I put my rods up for about 10 days and saying, I'm going to recharge my batteries and go back out there. But, not just because we're in kayaks, but, if you want to talk about up close and personal, we drift up on so many different wild creatures and see so many things, and can get in areas that people can't get into. That the kayak world, I'm not saying it's for everybody. I always say that's why there's chocolate and vanilla ice cream, because everybody likes something different. So if you want to go 60, you're not going to do it in a kayak unless you get caught in a tornado. So, but other than that, the wind's not your friend, but you can learn to use the wind. And it is the instinctive part of me. It's kind of like deer hunting, which I do. I don't have the passion for that like I do fishing, but the instinctive part of you feel a tremendous amount of success at figuring out the puzzle. Because believe me, you guys well know it's a puzzle out there.
Oh, very much so. Yep.
Now, talking about the wind is not your friend. You can make the wind your friend,
you can.
If it's anything like Zach and I, typically what happens is we'll blow down to one side of the lake, and then the wind's blowing against us as we try to paddle back it.
Yep.
It seems like
we think we'll get over here to get out of the wind, and then by the time we get there, it changes direction and cruises again. So we got to go back the other direction.
Well, you got to be making adjustments to nature is a big part of any outdoor activity. And I've been criticized for saying this, and guess what? I don't really care. But I said there's no such thing as bad weather, just people who aren't prepared for it. So when the wind blows, I go to the wind-blown bank and pick up a spinnerbait. Did it today. The spinnerbait bite's not great right now. We're getting some shad spawn, so it'll pick up. But, when that wind's pushing you around, it's like, let it do. I position myself with the paddle, but I'm launching that spinnerbait, and I've got a shad pattern type spinnerbait. And then when it drops off a little bit, I'll go back to a plastic worm, or like I said, today was a great frog bite. We're all over them, and we're living right on Woods Reservoir, but it's a new lake to me. When we're doing the TV shows, I fished all over the country, but I only got to fish some of these lakes 1 or 2 times. So when you live on one, everybody thinks, well, it's your home lake. Well, it's your home lake, but again, not using electronics and trying to figure things out. And a lot of it turns out to be a common sense thing. Like for me, we fish a lot of plastic. And the reason for that is if you look at what big fish are caught on, most of the time, for people that really know what they're doing with plastics, you mentioned tubes earlier, tubes, plastic worms, frogs, lizards, that whole thing. And I tell people there's 2 things that people ought to remember, R&R, retrieve and random action. Your random action baits, those plastic baits, soft plastics catch more big fish every year, and they will forever. And random action is the reason why, that if you throw a spinnerbait or a crankbait, and I'm not saying they won't work, but random action will actually, the fish never catch on to that. And Chad's throwing one thing and I'm throwing something else, and we're both throwing it different. Zach picks up something, he throws it different yet. So it's always going to be random action. It's silent. They're usually long, thin shapes, easily swallowed. The color you can dictate by sky color, wind velocity, those kind of things, but that random action. And I realized today when I was fishing, I know you guys have both done this. You throw out there and you just feel a little bit of something, you're not sure, and you go ahead and set the hook. I've added another R to it today. It's called resistance. When you feel something different on there, and even if it's a little bit of a weed, when you pull it back up, when you pull that up, it should have felt a little bit different. When you're in tune with what you're doing, that really does make a difference, because we've all had those bites when you're saying, I didn't feel anything except for just something felt a little different. If they're swimming towards the kayak, or if they're swimming to the side, or they're just kind of, and they're just swimming to deeper water with it. A lot of times you don't get that really pronounced tap, tap. You got to be ready to set the hook all the time. So feeling resistance is really, really important.
Oh, yeah.
Now, talking about flipping plastics, what's your go-to plastics combo?
I'm a big fan of throwing. You talked about the tubes, because a tube falls differently than anything else does. And let's face it, you guys, I think you're in Indiana. Your lakes get a Patoka. Gets a lot of pressure.
Lots of pressure.
When people are pressuring those fish, they need to see something different. Bass, crappie, bluegill, if you look at their eyes, they're telling you I feed by sight. So they have to get something different to really get them. Now we go back to the idea that you got random action, and a tube, when they bite down on that, is a different bite. And the mistake most people make is they use too small a hook. With a tube, I'm going to throw a 5/0 hook. I'm going to throw a 3/8 ounce slip sinker, and I put a red bead in between. And the red bead for me adds a color red. It keeps the line off of your knot a little bit, and will actually add a clicking sound when you're using it. So I do all of those things. And with that tube, I really, we talked about heavy cover. I really like to pitch that tube inside a cover and just kind of yo-yo it a little bit. And I've caught a lot of really big fish on that tube, a lot of fish. And the reason I pick up the 3/8 ounce is that everything that I throw 3/8 ounces. So it's like every time I throw, I'm feeling the same thing every time. It feels like 3/8. Yeah. It's kind of like throwing a softball 100 times and picking up a golf ball. It's when it feels the same every time. Casting accuracy, there's days when there's days when their strike zone is big. There's days when their strike zone is really small. So those days it's going to pay off if you can put that exactly where you want to put it.
Yeah.
Very good.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, rods and reels, like what are you looking at for those? Are you a medium heavy guy? Do you fish medium?
Well, this is another one of those things. I've been with Strike King and Lew's for probably over 35 years. So I'm the guy that's got 100 fishing rods, and I give away more of them than I keep. I can tell you that. And, I go with it's like we talked about the frog bite. I actually got to design some rods, and I designed some rods that were leaning to the side of heavy, but medium heavy is what they were marked as. So if you're, before the advent of braid, when you're using monofilament line, we all thought like 20-pound mono, you can winch them out of there. Mono's got stretch to it. It's got 10 to 15% stretch to it. So when you went to braid, it kind of made that a little bit easier. And if you look at all these big name guys that are fishing now, those rods are doubled up but what their compensation is they're using braid, which is no stretch and can make a good knot. Now, speaking about knots, I did a blog post for Jackson Kayak that said, don't go nuts over knots, is that a Palomar knot followed by a clinch knot on braid is a really good idea. Double up your knots, because sometimes that braid will slip a little bit. So I do go with the medium heavy rod for frogging, for jigs and plastic worms. And I've caught 7 bass over 10 pounds and 1 over 11, and 6 of those came on jigs. That's going to tell you exactly what I was saying before, that random action, so you can't argue with success. And, I also follow the moon phases. And if Zach's a hunter, I guarantee he'll tell you.
Nope, I lost his audio.
It's just how it goes. I mean, you may not like it, but boy, it's great for fishing. And if you don't fish in the wintertime, you're missing a big chance.
Yeah, and Tennessee's a great state because you guys really do get to fish pretty well. You get pretty well fish all year round.
We do. There's always a place here where you can fish. And, when I was traveling and doing seminars, people would say, do you ice fish? And I had a standard answer for that. I said, ice is God's way of saying it's time to quit fishing. I don't fish through the ice. But yeah, the winter months, again, there's probably less people. Now I preach down here about people wearing life jackets because it's not just a pet peeve. Every weekend here, I have to report on Monday morning that there's somebody that drowned because they weren't wearing a life jacket. And it's just that simple. It's just that simple. So in the wintertime, it's even more so, and I'm not saying there's time that not, and people say, well, I'm only in 7 feet of water. Well, dude, you can drown in 7 feet of water. And that life jacket is, I just really believe in that. You'll never see a picture of me in the boat without a life jacket. It's not going to happen. If I get a really big fish and I want to flash my JK, then I'm going to step out of the boat, but I'm going to be on land, on a boat ramp, on a dock somewhere, but I'm going to be wearing a life jacket. Otherwise, you can count on that. And again, like you said, we have the Highland reservoirs in the eastern part of the state where I just moved from. That's got, people will say, well, I'm catching those fish in 35 feet of water. What would you do? And I said, I don't know how to fish 35 feet of water. I'd stay home and watch cartoons. Some people would say I'm a power fisherman. I would say that I need my fish to be in 20 feet or less. And then I can figure it out. If they're in more than that, I'm just not the guy. I'm not a jig and spoon guy. But we have the eastern state that's got the Highland reservoirs. We've got, you go the other direction, the western part of the state that's got the Delta, Mississippi type of stuff and flatland. And then you go to middle and we've got a little of everything. But I'm telling you, I fished a lot of places. And, I moved to Tennessee when I was 30, so 42 years ago. And I've never been anywhere with the exception of Canada that I'd say if it never got cold in Canada, I would go just for the smallmouth fishing.
Well, and the black flies.
When I guided up there, I would not take a trip in there before the end of July. I would go in August because that's their fall and the black flies are gone. Yeah, because that's miserable. You could catch, it was nothing to catch a half a dozen smallmouth over 5 pounds. And I was pretty specific in what I was doing with people. And when people went up there and wanted walleye again, it's like, or lake trout, I said, I'm not the lake trout guy. That's slow and deep. And I said, I'm not that guy. I'm throwing buzz baits and spinner baits and single hook baits, especially for those smallmouth, because the last thing you want to do is try to unhook a smallmouth on a crankbait you got 6 hook points and saying, yeah, that's a losing proposition when you're out in the middle of a wilderness area.
Yeah, it can be. That's for sure. It can be. So we're talking about rods, we talked about reels and all that, but back to the radio thing. I'd like to hear, how did you get started on the radio channel? I mean, how did that transpire?
I was doing a boat show and emceeing a casting competition, and I was pitching a jig into a cup from 30 feet away, and it caught the attention of a lady that walked up there, and she said, I'm listening to you. And she said, you've got a great voice for radio. And then the story that follows behind that is you got a perfect face for radio. But what she said, you're really good at entertaining people and you keep it going. It's a lot of good discussion that you're having with people while you're doing all this. Would you like to try to do a radio spot? Well, you guys know you're out there, and every time somebody comes up there, 95% of the time that just never happens. And so her name was Jenny Harmon. She called me and said, come down to the station. Let's talk about doing this. So I went down there and we signed up to do just a Friday afternoon so that they could, people would get ready for the weekend. And it went from being fish tales and tips to inside the outdoors to Wild Side Radio, which is what it is now. It morphed into that because the TV show that we did was Tennessee's Wild Side. And actually the I'll Be Tennesseeing You, which I've got copyrighted now, came from that. When I'd catch my first fish on television, when I was turning it loose, nobody's going to remember Joey Monteleone, but when you say I'll Be Tennesseeing You, people would remember that. So the radio kind of went from one thing to the next, and now we're doing a regular feature every morning. And again, it's I've done some guest spots for other people's radio, and I guess it's it seems like a little bit of a lost art for people to do radio. That people sometimes, because if you think about it, the average person, they'll stay with a TV station or radio station for 45 seconds. If they're not into it, they switch, they go to the next thing. Yeah. So you got to really hit them. You got to have hard hitting stuff. And the trademark of this show that I try to tell people not what happened last week, because that doesn't matter. So if I'm fishing, like tomorrow morning, I'm going to tell them the water temperature here is 78. Water's relatively clear. We had a northwest wind that kept the temperature down to 74. And, this is what we found. We found fish as shallow as 4 feet. We found fish as deep as 18 feet. And this is what we did. So we're not telling them what happened last week. That's historical. Nobody cares. We're telling them what to do today, and probably as important as anything else, what to do next week. So it's not all fishing. It's outdoors, and on Thursday we have what we call campfire stories, where I get to lean back and tell a story about something I did many, many years ago, about a squirrel breaking into my house and the dog chasing it down and me catching it with a fishing net, or seeing black bears in Canada, or whatever, those kind of things. And Wednesday we have Wildlife Wednesday, and I take Tennessee, such a diverse state, that's so easy to do, that you can talk about, if you don't know about skunks, or if you don't know about raccoons, or those kind of things, that we get into some detail. And of course we mix that in with, like this week, it's Father's Day gifts at the very end. They say, this is, I suggest to people they go buy a Jackson kayak. It's kind of like, hey, if your dad don't have a kayak, he'll thank you for a lot of years. Just go buy him a Jackson kayak, get him a nice paddle and a life jacket, and send him out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. Now, with the radio, are you driving into the studio every day, or do you do it at home now, or how's that changed for you?
Well, they wanted me to come in studio, and I go in every once in a while, and I'll do a 2-hour set. But I do it from home now, because I told them I'd come in every day if they wanted me to. But I said, you better get your checkbook out, because it's going to really cost you. And I said, with the technology that you have today, it sounds like I'm I'm in the station anyway. So, barring any really freaky things happening, some weather event or something like that, it's very easy just to do from the house.
So as everything's evolving, do you ever see a Fishing with Joey podcast?
Oh, I think I would leave that to you guys. I've got, I retired at 61. So for the last 11 years, I hunt, I fish, I travel. And that's, I'm doing what everybody dreams about. When people said, you have a bucket list? And I said, no, I give you a bucket list. You follow me around for a while and you'll say, man, I'd really like to do that. And the really interesting thing for me with Chad and Zach talking to you guys is that I don't do anything. There's nothing that I do that anybody else can't do. I'm the guy next door. When people say, well, I heard you're a karate instructor for 20 years and you won 3 Eastern United States fighting championships. I'm saying, yeah, that doesn't take anything. You got to be a little dumb to do that, because you're going to, everything I have has been broken once or twice, but I'm not doing anything that somebody else can't do. When you climb in a kayak, when people say, well, I can't lift my kayak or I don't have a trailer, man, I put mine in the back of my truck. I want to tell somebody, give me your mother's phone number. I'll call her and have her help you load your kayak. I mean, it's not your purse. You don't have to lift the whole kayak. You just slide it in the back of the, where there's a will, there's a way. So you can get to the water. And I've been in places that, you have to drag that thing for a quarter of a mile or throw it up on your back. And, those are the places that those fish never see a lure. I'm not doing anything that anybody else can't do. I'm the guy next door.
Yeah. Everything's attainable. You just got to want it bad enough, right?
You really do. You really do. Well, most people will say, so you fish in the wintertime? And I said, well, yeah. I mean, if I'm telling people how to fish in the wintertime, then I need to fish in the wintertime. That if you're telling somebody in 48-degree water, you want to throw a jerk bait and a jig and leave everything else at home, because it's, you're not going to throw top water, or you start talking about seasonal tackle boxes. If I'm not doing this every day or, a couple of times a week, I can't be the expert if I'm not doing that. And sometimes I tell people, I can tell you what's not working because I went out yesterday and got skunked. So I can tell you, don't do this because that's not working. But that doesn't happen very often. It really doesn't. I've been pretty lucky. And, it's kind of like years ago, I kind of cracked the code for the big fish and figured out what they like and what they don't like. Like you were talking about the little fish, those cookie cutter bass, they're the liars. They're the ones that'll make you think that you got to figure it out. The big fish are the one that will really, really help you tap into the secrets.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there is something to that. You can go through there and sometimes, it can just be a change of direction too. The big fish may want to see it come from the opposite direction of where you're at. I mean, there's so many factors that really come into play a lot of times. And, it's a lot of it is trial and error. I feel like, as you're out there grinding each and every day and, you know, it's amazing to me that, you know, you're getting up there in your years, not saying anything bad. I think you're doing great, dude.
Yeah.
So how do you stay like, I mean, besides loading your kayak in and out every day in the karate, what do you do to keep yourself going? Like, how do you stay in shape and keep the balance? How would you inspire someone like yourself to say, listen, you can do this too?
Well, it's like everything else. You know, you should start. You know, I always believe that in sports, it's all about speed, and everything else, it's all about experience.
Mhm.
So you should know your limitations. I think Clint Eastwood said it first and probably said it better, but you should know your limitations. And for me, it's like the kayak is really an easy thing for me. And the first time that I was paddling a kayak, there was a bunch of JK people there and said, man, you've got a natural paddling stroke. And I said, this is just like karate. You're turning each time, you know, you're turning just you punch, you know, so you're using your core the whole time. And the other thing is staying active. I mean, I stretch, I still stretch. I take a little supplement called BioFlex, which is good for the joints. They recommend you take 3. I take 1. You know, I sleep as long as I want to sleep. You know, I put in the hours when I was a younger person. I put in the hours, did a lot of hard work. And, you know, so everybody knows their own body. You know, you wake up one day and say, man, I just don't feel good today. And so then you got to figure out what that is. Why is it that you don't feel good? And part of it for people that really age, and at 72, I'm not saying I'm, you know, am stronger, faster, smarter than anybody else, but at 72, I still feel like I'm not slowed up a bit. I can go, we paddle. It's not unusual for us to paddle 6 or 7 miles in the course of a fishing day. It's not unusual at all. She paddles, I paddle. And I paddle because I want to. And I'm not opposed to somebody motorizing their, you know, again, whatever works for you. If you're doing this and it's not fun, you're doing it wrong. That's what I would tell people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
pretty good advice.
Yeah, paddling. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. I still, even though I pedal more often now, I still enjoy paddling. I still keep a paddling boat here at the house. First thing I do when I get a new boat is I paddle it like the Nar. It actually paddles phenomenal. The Coosa FD paddled phenomenal. And, you know, it's nice to have that ability. My wife enjoys paddling. She doesn't like pedaling. So it makes sense that when I go with her.
Well, and you know, the other thing about the paddling, and again, I'm not trying to tell somebody else that this is what you need to do. Whatever that is that you like to do, I've always got my own system for doing everything. And to me, the paddle becomes, you know, and I've said this before in a lot of in podcasts and in blog posts, that paddle becomes your outboard and your trolling motor. And probably most important, even if you're in a big boat, the big boat the motor gets you there, but the trolling motor is what's going to set you apart. So the paddle allows you to go in. Today, when I'm correcting, because I stand up 90% of the time, that's the other thing. The karate gives you good balance, or pretty soon you become a good swimmer one way or the other. But that paddle gives you the chance to make smaller corrections, and the drift in there, I call it, because again, the martial arts thing, put you in ninja stealth mode, that you are going in. I had a fish hit that frog today that wasn't 3 feet from the front of my boat. That fish never knew I was there ever. So it's, you know, the trolling motor does one thing. I'm not against the pedals, but sound travels through water 5 times faster than it does through air.
Yes, it does.
So it's one of those things that I'm not saying you won't catch fish, but I will tell you that my system says you get in there, you drift in there, you drop that bait in there as unobtrusive as you can be, and you'll be surprised how many big fish you'll catch. You know, people say, well, that body of water doesn't have any big fish in it. There's some truth to that. Not every body of water has big fish in it. It takes healthy water, a diverse forage base, and you know, and people being smart enough to do some catch and release. Like, I would never fillet a 5-pound bass. It's not going to happen. I eat fish. I certainly eat fish. And when crappie season is on, it's like, you know, I do a 50-50 rule for crappie in the spring. I keep one, I leave one, I keep one, I leave one. And I don't clean more than 10 or 12 of anything, because I know I can go back and catch another limit if I wanted to do that tomorrow. But I catch enough to make a meal or a meal and a half. But if you've ever deep fried crappie, believe me, there's not any leftovers.
No,
So-
not at all.
This is kind of a conversation I'm going to throw at you. Zach and I and our other Hanyaks that we call friends have had this conversation multiple times. And it kind of goes, my philosophy on this kind of goes back to farming in a way. If there's a farm and it's a fenced farm, There's no free range or anything like that. And you've got a bull. Eventually, this bull has run his course. It's time for Farmer John to get a new bull to put with the herd because, new cows have come in, or you've kept some of the young heifers that have grown up, and you need to get a new bull so that your genetics stay good in your herd. A lot of times, some of these locked or fenced reservoirs that are not really fed by much more than a small creek. They're not like the Tennessee River, the Cumberland River, any river system, so to speak. They don't really get restocked very often. They may have built this lake in the 60s, and these fish have been there since the 60s with a very minimal restocking. So they haven't added any new bulls to that. Do you believe that that's, not an influx of new fish into a reservoir like that is potentially what hurts long term because you're not putting a new bull into the pen?
Well, you make a good point, but I would offer this, that genetically, for every pound a bass weighs, a female weighs, she can lay 1,000 eggs. Out of that 1,000 eggs, 2 of them make it to 2 pounds. But so if you're in a very fertile lake, and lakes when they're freshly built are very, very fertile. You can look at every lake that's ever been constructed. For the first 5 years, I mean, everybody says it's a bass factory, it does do that. As long as the water quality is maintained. And and I think people have gotten a little smarter about catch and release. And the fact that you can make a replica now and you don't have to take that fish. And, those big fish can genetically produce more big fish. And unless you have a big die-off, which you can have, I mean, that can happen. But unless you have a big die-off, just natural bodies of water, if you've gotten to go to places that are, when I was in Canada, when I was in Mexico, you can see that those places, the smaller fish don't survive. The big fish do. They're genetically predisposed. They actually get a little, I don't want to say smarter, because a bass has got a brain about half the size of a hazelnut. They're not smart. They become conditioned. But one of the things you'll learn is that if you look at bass, when they're little, they don't realize how big or little they are, and they will chase little bait. Well, a big fish realizes that when it runs through a bunch of 1-inch minnows, it doesn't get many of them because their gill rakers get bigger. So they start eating the ones that get bigger, eat bigger. So the idea of a bigger bait and a bigger bass is probably, I think, more accurate than people realize. But what happens is the ones that don't get it, they do die off. There's no question. So the superior ones live, and a lifespan for a bass where you're living is probably about 10 or 11 years. In Florida, it's about 7 or 8 years because they burn themselves out. So, I'm somewhere in between. So, bass, you can actually take a scale from a bass, and it's like when you cut a tree, and the rings in a tree are called annuli. That's Latin for the rings for years. And a bass scale has got exactly the same thing on it. It's got where you can judge how old a bass is by that. With deer, you can look at the teeth or the antlers or whatever and figure it out. But with a bass, you can do that. And your point's a good one. But I think people probably are a little bit more in tune with. I can show you pictures from old magazines because I collect that old stuff. And people were fishing for food. In 1944, the Creek Chub Lure Company, the guy told me we sold more artificial baits during the Depression than we did any other time. And I said, well, that doesn't make any sense. And he said, well, it does when you realize people were fishing for food. Nobody put anything back. So now people are smart enough to say, it's a culture where we say we're going to return that. Let them go, let them grow. There's a bunch of little slogans, but people want to go back, and I think I really believe people would rather catch 2 really big fish than 10 cookie cutter bass. I know for me,
100%.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a rush. I mean, I actually sit down when I hook a big fish because I stand up when I'm fishing, but I sit down when I'm reeling that big fish in because, sometimes still after, and it sounds like a brag, but it's documented. I stopped counting after 1,500 fish that weighed over 5 pounds. I've been in great places. I've gotten to fish a lot, and I've kind of figured out what they do, but I still get excited when I get one on. I still get excited. I mean, it's just, my knees are shaking and my hands are shaking. When you're done, you pull a 7, 8, 9 pound. I caught a 9-pound fish about a week and a half ago.
Mhm.
I'm telling you, I couldn't wait to call everybody and send the pictures out. You know, that's my electronics. I grab that cell phone, and everybody that I know and some people that I don't are going to get pictures of.
Well, and I
That's
think you
okay.
said it right there. I mean, anytime you catch a fish of substantial size, it's going to cement that memory a lot harder than all those, those short fish.
Well, and when I say I'm not a deer hunter, I go because I love watching the woods wake up, and I've got a access to a 1,000-acre farm that's gated, and the guy won't let anybody else hunt in there but me. And he heard me on the radio.
Oh, wow.
Enough. Yeah,
I need to meet this guy.
Yeah, well,
Does he listen to the podcast?
it's almost like a petting zoo because last year,
Yeah.
it's kind of like I decide if I'm going to take a doe or take a buck, whatever. And with the bucks, I always tell people you can't eat antlers, but when the right deer comes by, and it did 2 years ago, I dumped a 10-pointer, and I told people, I said, and this again sounds like a brag, but I don't know many people that have caught a 10-pound bass and gotten a 10-point buck, and I said I've done that, and the bass isn't hanging on the wall, but the buck antlers are.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of similarities. I don't know how much you guys hunt, but if you look at a big buck and a big bass, they're living by their wits. They're, when people say, well, that buck didn't know I was there, I was 100% scent proof. I said, no, you're not. That's never going to happen. Never going to happen. You're wearing something that's giving off your scent. And when people say, well, we went into this little cove and that bass didn't know I was there. No, that bass knows you're there. You just do something to make it feel like whatever that is looks like something to eat. Then it's his job to eat it. It's your job to present it. And, you learn a lot of lessons. I've learned a lot of fishing lessons in the tree stand and learned a lot of hunting lessons out in the kayak. That sounds corny, but, the wind, sound, what sound does, and fast movements and shadows and that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's all translatable and transferable for sure.
Yeah, Zach, this is a perfect example. Zach and I went to an area when he was home over Memorial Day weekend. We went in there and caught fish. Wasn't no big deal. Easy peasy. I mean, there was boats sitting everywhere, at the party boats. And, we kind of hung back at the back of this cove, and we were really to ourselves. Our footprints were our kayaks. We caught fish. Very next Thursday, me and my other buddy were fishing a Thursday nighter out of a 20-foot skeeter. Go in there, nothing.
Yep.
Nothing. Bigger footprint, more noise.
Absolutely.
And it's amazing when you're in a kayak and you've been in a kayak for a lot of time, how much noise a big boat makes.
It does.
You hear it.
One thing that I point out to people is you're in recreation mode, they're in survival mode. There's a big difference in fighting for survival and when you're out there just kind of recreating. And I mean, let's be honest about it. I've heard people say, and I take the compliments with a grain of salt, but they say you're one of those people they say 10% of the people catch 90% of the fish. There's some truth to that, and again, experience, you guys have both done this. You'll pull up to, I don't care if you pull up to a hunting spot or a fishing spot, you're looking and say, this is it right here. You just know, and that's
1000%.
experience speaking, right? That's experience speaking. I've had a cameraman tell me before we were. I said on TV, I would say roll on me, and I do a stand up, so it's kind of like a podcast to a certain extent. And I said, I'm going to throw a crawfish colored crankbait, or I'm going to throw a soft plastic crawl over at the base of that spot right there. And they said, well, why? And I said, well, there's a lot of limestone rock and it's fallen, and it's 2 mud banks on the side, and gravity's been working for the last 9 million years, means there's a lot of limestone rock down there and crawfish live in there. I'm going to throw in there and catch a fish. And cast in there, and the first cast I caught a 2.5 pounder, and somebody said, how'd you know that? And I said, some of it's common sense, some of it experience. And there was somebody else along, a tech guy was along, and he asked the cameraman, said, have you ever seen him do that before? He said, 500 times. He said, it's just, he looks at it and he knows, and it is, you just know that's the spot. Doesn't work every time, but there's that little, it really truly is a sixth sense that you should follow when you're in the outdoors.
Well, that's the difference between experience and wisdom, right?
Yes.
You can have the knowledge to do it, but do you have the experience to apply it? And just, rolling up on a spot like that, reading the context clues, the environment and everything, and just knowing, color choice, bait profile, presentation, and it just, things happen the way they're supposed to happen.
I was fishing a benefit tournament in Missouri, where I'm originally from, and I went back and they called it Dream Factory. They granted wishes to terminally ill children, and I helped start that. So I went back every year to fish the tournament, and I kind of felt bad taking their money. So I went in there, and the first day the guy I was with didn't catch a fish, and I got my limit, and we were doing pretty good. And the second day we went out there and I caught a really, really nice fish. And so it was different because somebody was interviewing me and the guy said, well, the tournament's over. You mind telling everybody what you're doing? I said, no, I don't mind at all. It says pitching a black and blue jig. And they said, yeah, okay, pitching. I said, well, there's a lot of people pitching a black and blue jig. And I said, yeah. I said, I was pitching the boat docks. And he said, well, I have to tell you, there's probably a lot of people pitching the boat docks. And I said, I was pitching the boat docks that had spider webs under them. He said, spider webs. I said, yeah, nobody pitched under there in a week. I said, so, you don't have to be smarter than everybody, just a few people,
a few.
Yep, just a few.
Yeah. And, some of the advice I give people when they say I'm never catching any fish, I said, go to smaller baits and slower retrieves. I said, you will be astounded. I'm not saying you're going to catch the biggest fish in the lake, and I'm not going to say you're going to limit out, but smaller baits and slower retrieves generally will catch you a fish.
Yeah, I went through that process. A lot of people were buying faster reels, and they always wanted the fastest reel that they could possibly buy. And sometimes if you buy that old 5.4 and you throw that spinnerbait on that 5.4 reel, they're going to eat it.
Yep. And,
that's usually when you'll catch the big one.
Well, and the great American way, if a little's good, a lot is better. So, you go from let's go to a 10.1 to 1. It's like, man, what are you going to use that for? You realize you can't really take a bait away from a bass if it wants it, because they can swim in bursts of 12 to 15 miles an hour in a burst. But, you can make it look like, well, heck, I don't want to chase that. I mean, there's no way I'm going to chase it, So keeping it in the strike zone is probably a lot more important than people realize. And again, regardless, I mean, if you look at flipping, I mean, true flipping, which I don't do very often, but I do when there's lily pads and heavy grass, that you're making a house call. If you can't make that fish come to you, you go to the fish, and people just sometimes they don't understand that. And they just think, well, that fish is only in 4 or 5 feet of water. Again, enter the kayak. You're slipping in there really quietly. That thing drops in there. You yo-yo it a couple of times, let it sit, and yo-yo it a couple of times. And on the third trip, if nothing happens, you go to the next hole. But, again, if you're only fishing for 5 fish, it just really doesn't take much. And that's the other thing that I'm sure you guys know how to do this. But, when people start to pattern a fish, when I was guiding, somebody catch a fish, and I said, so what did you do different to catch that fish? And they'd say, well, I don't know. Well, that's not repeatable. So if you want to put a pattern together, whether you're fishing for fun or casting for cash, you got to put a pattern together, and it's really not that hard to do if you're paying attention.
Yeah, that's good. Okay. Well, we are about 10 minutes here left to go. You have got a couple questions from the audience based on comments that you've made tonight. I'm going to read them to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Joey Lasprey. He wants to know what your favorite cartoon is since you don't go ice fishing.
Well, I still like the Roadrunner and the Coyote. And the only reason I really like that is it's a big lie, because a coyote's faster than a Roadrunner.
Okay. Adam Fraser, he wants to know where you guided up in Canada. He said that's super cool.
I went into an area called the Quetico. It's a government protected area. They call it the Boundary Waters in Ely, Minnesota. If you're coming up through there, I was going in through Canada, coming down, and it's 3 million square acres, and with 1 million square acres of water. And it's the best smallmouth fishing in the entire planet. It's got northern pike, smallmouth. It doesn't have any largemouth. It's got lake trout, and it was more fun than should be allowed by the law. And I mean, I was going up there, coming back with a little jingle in my pocket. Somebody was paying me to teach them how to fish, and I was getting a vacation out of it. So it was a very interesting place, very interesting. It was nothing. I've had days when I caught 100 fish, but I'm not 100 fish a day guy. I'm not trying to catch 100 fish. I'm trying to catch, if I have my choice, I want to catch everything over 5 pounds. I like to catch 5 over 5. So that trip up there, if you just fish the points and you were in a canoe, and I was married at the time, and the guy said to me, boy, I bet you really miss your wife. I said, you know what I really miss is my trolling motor, because I'm going to paddle all over these lakes to try to find these fish. But the smallmouth bite was unbelievable.
I like that one a lot.
Any way you wanted to catch them, it was really something.
Now, Lance McCorder, team member Lance McCorder from Jackson Kayak, he wants to know if you would be interested in becoming his dad.
Well, you know, I'm not your dad.
He doesn't. Oh, goodness.
Shoot.
Let's see.
That's how you
I
close it
think
out.
that was our big, that was our big questions that the guys had put in here.
You know, a little shameless self-promotion. I spent a lot of time writing my second book. It's called 60 Seasons. And there's no secrets. Everything's in the book. And, you know, it's relatively cheap for what you think. You know, for a lot less than you can buy a rod or a reel. For $19.95, you can go on Amazon and get 60 seasons. And whether you fish for crappie or catfish, you know, I look at some lures and say, you know, you can catch a walleye on a crankbait, just the same crankbait you catch a bass on. You know, you look at soft plastics and you can catch every manner of fish on a soft plastic. So there's a lot of little things that make a difference, the detail things that make a difference in trying to catch a bunch of fish and big fish in that book. And I get people all the time would say, they'll call or they'll email or they'll message and saying, what are you doing such and such? And I said, did you buy my book? And I said, no. I said, buy the book. You know, it's the answers are in the book. You know, it's kind of like if you're a person of belief, when somebody says something, I said, it's in the Bible. I said, all you got to do, look, every answer is in the Bible. I'm not saying my book is the Bible, certainly, but I am saying there's 60 seasons of experience that are sitting in those pages. And it's got probably, I think it's got somewhere in the neighborhood of 160 different titles. And spinners are for winners. And, until depth do us part. When fish go deep, what do you do? You know, kind of a thing. So I would highly recommend that people find that book. And through the summer months, 25% of the profits going to St. Jude's Children's Hospital. So, you know, you're doing me a favor and you're doing St. Jude's Children's Hospital a big favor if you buy the book through the summer months.
That's great.
And I am dropping that right now. Amazon. I can remember how to spell Amazon. It's been a long day.
It's been a long week, hasn't it?
It's been a long week. I guess that's the best way to put it thus far.
And it's only Tuesday.
It is. I guess it is just Tuesday, ain't it? Yeah. All right. So there's a link to 60 Seasons on Amazon. If you guys want to check that out, it is in the comments on the Orion Facebook page and the Jackson Kayak YouTube channel. So Joey, it's time. Thank everybody that you need to thank, your wonderful sponsors that you've been with for many, many years. Tell the people where to find the radio show, and obviously pick up a book on Amazon if you're listening.
Yeah, pick up the book. It really is well worth the while. The radio station is AM 650 WSM. Like I said, it's been around for 97 years. One of the first. They call it the Air Castle of the South, and we reach a lot of different places. And again, we're on the World Wide Web. And as far as sponsors, we don't even have enough time. I'm telling you, Strike King Lures, Jackson Kayak, Bending Branches Paddles, K9 Fishing Line, Mid-South Tackle, Slider, I'm not getting checks from everybody, but that's one of the pluses of being one of the old timers, the graybeards, is I'm still getting checks from a lot of the sponsors, and I have a lot of people to thank for that. I really do, because again, I have no particular talent other than I'm willing to work hard, and I've always said, that and I made my way in the editorial world writing magazine articles because I told editors, if you got something that somebody else can't do or won't do, call me and I'll do it. And doing the boat shows that I tell people, whatever you need me to do other than being the mascot of the boat show, I will do that. And for 35 years, I did boat shows all over the country and I'm not saying I didn't like the money. I did like the money, but you meet new people and when you're talking to people and you're getting that head nod from people where they understand exactly what it is you're saying and you're reaching them and you go through generations. I was on the launch ramp at Kentucky Lake and I was helping a guy back his boat in, and I introduced myself. He said, I know who you are. Mm-hmm. He said, you were at the National Boat Show and you taught my son how to pitch a jig, and he never fished before that, and he hasn't stopped since. And I said, there is a life-changing event. When you're able to do that and change, even if it's one life, this is a big old world. We're all just trying to make our way in it. And, I'm no better than anybody else is. I just get to fish a lot and get to be in the outdoors a lot. And when people say they're blessed, I'm telling you, I have truly been blessed to be in the right place at the right time around the right people. I I couldn't stress that enough. I'm just I'm the most blessed person I've ever run into easily.
I like it. I like it a lot. And hard work. Lance McWhorter says hard work is an incredibly underrated talent, and it is 100,000%.
Yeah, especially these days.
Hard work goes a long way, and I think we've got a lot of good people at Jackson Kayak that are testament to that. So yeah, thank our sponsors here for the show. Obviously, Jackson Kayak, Orion Coolers. Pick your Orion cooler up at jacksonkayak.com. You can save 5% with code Orion Rocks at checkout. Accessories ship free. So buy you a cooler, get a whole bunch of accessories, pick up one of the limited edition 55s. There's
There you go.
only a few of the yellow ones left. I heard rumor this week already that the yellow ones are running out and they are never to be seen again. So if you want a yellow ribbon cooler, pick that dude up, jacksonkayak.com. Obviously Bass Coast Swag, thank them. Cast King rods and reels. We appreciate the heck out of them. Z Pro lithium batteries, keeping Zach and I powered all season long. We love them. They've been great batteries. You don't even have to charge them. You don't even have to charge them. They just wake up with power. That's a lie, but you should charge your battery. That's a bold-faced lie. Charge your battery, kids. But yeah, power lasts. They do last very, very well. So
a side note on the coolers is that, everybody, I said, there's no such thing as bad weather with people that aren't prepared for it. I've got a Orion 65 that it's my emergency go-to. If we lose our power, I take all the stuff out of the freezer, the stuff out of the refrigerator, and put it in that cooler. And it's going to be good before they get the power back on. That's for sure. And my Jackson Kayak was made in 2017, and it's been probably on the water probably 700 times. So that's a testament to, the quality. I take care of it. That's a testament to the quality, and I can load it by myself. I don't need my mommy to help me.
I like it. I like it a lot. Well, guys, thanks for watching. We'll be back in action tomorrow night. We've got a little show we like to call Jackson Kayak Dock Talk, which we assemble the Avengers of kayak fishing, our Jackson Kayak team, and put them on the show together as an esteemed panel to take all your questions, give you all the answers, and talk all things kayak fishing. So with that being said,
working on possibly a special episode next week.
Yeah, special episode, possibly a special episode. It may be pre-recorded, it may be live. We'll let you guys know though.
Yeah,
it's gonna be a good one.
Yeah, we'll see if that comes through.
We're hoping that episode finally comes through. So we've been waiting on this one a long time, and hopefully the stars of Orion have aligned. Good night, everybody. Joey, tell them.
I'll be Tennesseeing you.
Have a good night, folks.
Later.
See you.